Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 7:06 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news. Good Tuesday morning to one and all. And thanks for tuning in to O'Connor and Company. I'm Julie Gunlock, sitting in for Larry alongside Hans von Spakovsky. Hello. Good morning, Hans.
Good morning, Julie. And gosh, we're halfway through the morning. The time goes fast when you're having fun.
It does, and we are having fun. At 7:35, we'll talk to Emily Goodin. She's senior White House correspondent at the Daily Mail. And at 8:35, we'll talk to our friend Carrie Pickett from the Washington Times. Joining us now is Dr. Kevin Roberts, Heritage Foundation president. He's the author of a new book, Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America. My goodness, the timing of this book, Kevin.
Well, thanks for having me, Julie. And boy, you've got a great sidekick there today. I've got some good things to say about Hans, but yeah, just consider it timing providence. We were going to release this before the election, and then we sat down and looked at my schedule and said, "Oh man, we got to go register 100,000 voters," which we did with Heritage Action. Go chase their ballots. Let's go focus on that. And then after the election, thinking that the good guys will win, maybe we can play a role in articulating what an aspirational vision for conservatism in America is. So here we are.
Well, that might be helped by the fact that you have this guy I think a few people have now heard of who wrote your foreword to your book named J.D. Vance.
Yeah, I remember talking to people about who should write the foreword, and there were a lot of great possibilities, and J.D. was always at the top of the list. And when he said, he jumped at the chance and he said, "And Kevin, there will be no ghostwriter of this. I'm writing this myself." I thought, oh my gosh, this really is providence. Obviously, I'm grateful he's going to be not just a wonderful vice president for the obvious parts of that role, Hans, but as the three of us and so many in your audience know, he's just such a thoughtful, authentic guy. He's the kind of person we need more of in politics. And I'm really optimistic that he will inspire a lot of young men and women to jump into that very important arena.
Well, inspire rhymes with conspire, and this book really is about almost the vast left-wing conspiracy in the way it's taken over our government, all of our institutions, academia, et cetera. In fact, you came up with a very interesting term called the uniparty. Can you explain to our audience about that?
Yeah, the uniparty is, I think, the best way to explain what happens in Washington most of the time. And so for those of us who are political conservatives, when we see that there's a Republican majority, keep that in mind over the next few years, and we see that there is a popular will for a particular policy, let's say not spending more money than the government takes in, but then we see that not only are we spending more money than the government takes in, but that somehow, some way, a Republican majority in Congress finds a way to participate in that. That's because the people who are writing the bills, the people who are running the show, are all on K Street or on Capitol Hill, and not that every Republican is like every Democrat, but the uniparty is that unified ecosystem, if you will, that unified system that really does have Washington's interest at heart rather than the American people's. But the good news here, Hans, to sum up here, is that the American people have spoken once again, and not only do we have, I think, a mandate, but we have an executive who has served a term already as president and is ready to govern, and I think he's going to take on the uniparty if I had to bet a dollar.
Kevin, what you're describing here is the fourth branch of government, the credentialed class, sort of this behemoth bureaucratic mess that Washington has become. And so many of us worry that it will be difficult for any president, and even for Trump, and for these good men and women who are going to be a part of his administration to sort of clear out this administrative state. What are some of the steps that need to be taken right away to sort of kick off this effort?
There are some key steps that need to be taken in the next weeks and months, Julie, but let me just respond to your question with some context. I think it's going to take the better part of a generation to fix this problem. And I say that not to be pessimistic or to discourage people, but just to let people know that when we're talking at Heritage about getting to work, we're not just talking about helping to form the government and being of service to the administration and the congressional leadership and implementing good policy, but understanding that this is something that's going to take, that is dismantling the administrative state, weakening the power of the uniparty, is something that's going to take several years. And so the first step, and you see it happening already, is that President-elect Trump needs to appoint men and women with experience, with virtue, but very importantly, with fortitude. They need to exist inside Washington, but not be of Washington. They need to exist adjacent to the uniparty, but be willing to take on the uniparty. And the second step that needs to happen is a series of executive orders ranging from education to border security to deregulation to the rule of law across the land. And then the third step is, and this is really important for us at Heritage, we do want to get out of this sort of ping pong game of Democrat presidents implementing executive orders, Republican presidents implementing executive orders. Congress needs to step up here. And so just as much as we've been focused on executive action, we've also been working on legislative pieces of legislation that, of course, are part of that executive action. And it will be incumbent upon Speaker Johnson and whomever Republicans elect as the majority leader to be participating in that as colleagues.
You know, the other thing I found interesting about the book is, and a very important point, is talking about how conservatives, and by conservatives, we mean people who believe in the Constitution and the rule of law and the basic principles this country was founded on. They've been spending almost all their time putting out fires on the defensive, and you say in the book, conservatives need to start their own fires in many different areas. Again, explain what you're talking about there.
I think it's really important in nonfiction, if you'll permit me 30 seconds of a literary observation, to use metaphors. They're powerful. In fact, as I tell Julie and Larry every time I'm on, one of the reasons they're effective as radio hosts is because they do that. Hans, and the very serious work you do on election integrity and other things, you do the same. And so as an outdoorsman, I'm enamored with this concept of a controlled burn, what the Forest Service should be doing more of in our forest, where they initiate a controlled fire so that they get rid of the dead wood. It makes the forest a lot healthier. And metaphorically speaking, figuratively speaking, I think conservatives need to stop fighting these fires at rotten institutions like every Ivy League school, most public school systems, not because everyone in those systems are bad people. That's not what I'm saying, but because we need to go on the offense and regenerate these institutions with the concept of a controlled burn, of making sure that board members, presidents, superintendents, any elected or appointed leader actually stand willing to confront the very small, but still very vocal minority of people who are trying to upend American values in those institutions. In other words, folks, what I'm saying is it's not enough to win elections. It's not enough to appoint great people to the president's cabinet. It's not enough to have a Republican majority in the House and Senate. We, the people, need to be inspired by Francis Scott Key's own inspiration when he penned those words, Dawn's Early Light, to get out and take back our local schools, to regenerate the institutions in American life. Otherwise, this great victory, which we've celebrated for a week, will be for naught.
Kevin, we have a few more questions for you. Can you stay on for another segment?
Oh, Julie, I'm at your disposal. That would be fun.
That's awesome.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Need a new roof? Go to longroofing.com. Get your free estimate today.
Dr. Kevin Robert. We're talking to Dr. Kevin Roberts, Heritage Foundation president and author of the new book, Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America. Kevin, this is a real joy to read. I really appreciate getting a copy of this. I enjoyed it, and I'm sending it or giving it to my kids to read next. You mentioned, and I say my kids, they're older, they're in high school, but you mentioned that it might take a generation to dismantle the administrative state. And in your book, this is what I think is so important for young people to read. you talk about the return of the frontier, self-reliance, skill, diligence, industry, courage, neighborliness. These are some basic tenets of America. But you warn that three things keep us from going back to the frontier: convenience, safety, and immaturity. They're barriers to returning to that frontier lifestyle. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think one of the most important factors, most important dynamics in American history is this concept we all know of manifest destiny. And in other words, when the United States was sort of deemed to control the territory from the Pacific to the Atlantic Oceans, when we ran out of that territory, when our frontiersmen got all the way to Oregon and California and Washington State, there was this notion that maybe we would lose what America is because there was always this desire to keep moving west. What I'm trying to tap into is that many decades later, obviously, we still are governed by this concept, if not to move west literally, to always be aspiring to something new. And one of the things that we're doing to undermine that natural American spirit, Julie, is not letting our kids grow up when they need to grow up, not letting our institutions, for that matter, our for-profit ventures fail. Look, we don't want any human, especially a fellow American, to suffer. We don't want that. But it's very important that whether we're talking about the government bailing out big corporations, thereby making them immature, it's inoculating them from the repercussions of the profit incentive if they aren't doing well. Or, speaking as a dad of four, if we're not making that really hard choice when we know that our teenagers are making hopefully just a minor mistake, to sit there and let them learn a hard lesson, or as teachers, we're not letting kids understand the repercussions of bad behavior, we're creating not just a lack of virtue in our fellow citizens, we're actually having an effect, if you add up all of those examples of undermining that American zeal, that American spirit to aspire to great things. And I think that's the kind of issue that is so far upstream from politics and policy that is an example of what individual Americans can do to recapture this American spirit.
Yeah, I think what you're talking, we just finished this huge political battle in a political arena, but what you're talking about is we have to take back the culture. I mean, we're in a culture war in this country.
Well, we are, and I know some people, particularly in your listening area, our listening area, will hear the phrase culture war and want to run away. And to that, I say two things. The first is it's the radical left that set the terms of the culture war. The only reason it's controversial is because the center right in this country, common sense people, are saying we've had enough. We just want to wake up in a normal country. But secondly, and more challenging even than that point, Hans, is that the culture war is happening every time we have a conversation with our kids. It's happening every time we have a colleague who needs a professional fraternal correction. It's happening every time, going back to your question about the uniparty, that there is an elected leader whom we admire, we might agree with on everything, but who routinely puts the interests of Washington ahead of the ordinary American. What I'm saying in this book and what we're saying at Heritage writ large is that now is the time to stand up, to go fight for common sense, to fight for the truth. And on the matter of the culture war, whether it is fighting transgender ideology or the other issues associated with that, the American people have not just asked us to take action on this, they're demanding it.
You also talk about a spiritual war with China. I would love to get your thoughts on, you talk so beautifully about why China is a threat, not just a military threat, but you say that so many people, in focusing on the military threat, they forget that China's overall strategy is pitting America against America. Tell me a little bit about that. And you also say you weren't always such a China hawk, but you are now. I'd love you to explain your concerns about China, which are obvious to many, but this America versus America I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, Julie, thanks for that. I've undergone the same evolution I think many, if not most, political conservatives have on China, from believing as recently as 10 years ago that we would turn China into America in the best sense of that, obviously, respecting their beautiful culture and history. Yeah. But in fact, the Chinese Communist Party has done the opposite, whether through their invasion of privacy using TikTok, through their implementation of Confucius Institutes in several dozen American universities, through their infiltration of K Street lobbying firms, by the way, that ought to be outlawed as one of the initial steps of confronting the Uniparty, or using the altruism of the United States as it relates to the environment, which is that, many Americans support wind and solar energy. We do at Heritage as well. We just want to get rid of the subsidies. All of that benefits China. And ultimately what they're doing is playing a very long game, which they do better than any culture on the planet, of letting discord be sown here in the United States, ostensibly by other Americans. But if you start following the money trail, which I map out a little bit in the book, a lot of that actually goes back to Beijing. We need, in the policy sphere, just resolute policy action on this. I'm so encouraged on that point that Congressman Mike Waltz will apparently be the national security advisor. There are rumors, as you know, that Senator Rubio will be the Secretary of State. We're waiting confirmation of that by President Trump. But both of these men aren't just China hawks. They are men who, like me and so many people at Heritage, have undergone this evolution, understanding that the Chinese Communist Party is the greatest adversary in the history of the United States, in part because it is so successful at sowing this discord among us.
Kevin, you are one of my favorite guests and always love listening to you talk about these important issues. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. And good luck with this book. Again, it's Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America. Publication day is today. Congratulations.
Well, thanks. And you are my favorite radio host, and this is my favorite radio show. And you have one of my favorite colleagues, Hans, on. So what a great conversation.
We have been having a ton of fun, and what we look forward to having you back on. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thanks, Julie.
It's 7:24.
Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:37, a good Tuesday morning to one and all. Thanks for tuning into O'Connor and Company. I'm Julie Gunlock, sitting in for Larry alongside Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, it's been great hosting with you.
Well, thanks for having invited me back. I really enjoyed doing this with you.
It is fun. At 8:35, we'll talk to Carrie Pickett from the Washington Times. And she'll talk about this story of Dave McCormick, who is not being allowed into the Senate orientation. So that'll be interesting. Joining us now is Emily Goodin. Emily is a senior White House correspondent at the Daily Mail. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning.
Well, thanks for joining us. You have an exclusive story over at the Daily Mail about how Melania Trump, the next First Lady, will be skipping a White House tea with the First Lady, Jill Biden. Tell us what's going on.
So it's traditional that the sitting president and First Lady invite the new incoming president-elect and the incoming First Lady to the White House to have a meeting, but also show them around and talk to them about what it's like, to be president and First Lady. And President-elect Trump is coming on Wednesday, tomorrow at 11 a.m. to meet with President Biden. And the First Lady, Dr. Biden, invited Melania Trump to the traditional First Lady tea, and Mrs. Trump is not attending. She has an engagement due to her memoir, Melania, that's out. So she has decided to skip. I mean, obviously she knows what it's like to live in the White House. She's
Right.
not a novice.
Right.
So, she knows where all the bathrooms are. She knows how it works. But yeah, it's an interesting snub because if you remember 4 years ago, then President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump did not invite Joe and Jill Biden after they won the election.
Right.
Right.
Well, and and Hans, you had mentioned this too. I mean, there have been some pretty horrible rhetoric coming out of the Biden White House, including from Jill Biden about Trump. So this seems a little bit like a loyalty thing to me.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, just to add to that, I would have a hard time sitting down. It's one thing to have disagreements about political issues, but I would have a hard time sitting down with somebody who compared me to one of the worst mass murderers in history simply because I have a different view of foreign policy and domestic policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dr. Biden on the campaign trail was very strong against Donald Trump, saying he was a threat to democracy. So,
Meanwhile, it doesn't seem like the iciness is only between Melania and Jill. Yesterday, and you also had a story on this. You wrote, "It is unseasonably warm. It is an unseasonably warm 72 degrees in Washington, D.C. today, but conditions look downright icy in the VIP viewing area of Arlington National Cemetery. There we saw Jill Biden. You write, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, looked stoic as she sat next to Kamala Harris while her husband, President Joe Biden, delivered the Veterans Day address. The First Lady stared straight ahead as the Vice President grinned and leaned into husband Doug Emhoff. I saw the video. You could cut the tension with a knife.
You really could. It was pretty amazing. And if you look at the video before the Vice President joined the box, Dr. Biden and Doug Emhoff, who have a close relationship, were chatting. They were warm. They were friendly. And the temperature just dropped 20 degrees when the Vice President joined them. It was quite remarkable.
Emily, I actually have a kind of a unrelated question to this, but concerning, you're the White House correspondent for Daily Mail. There's been some fights in the past, particularly there were some disputes with the Biden White House over who and how they give credentials to people to be in the White House covering things there. Do you expect any changes in how the Trump administration, the Trump White House, decides who will be allowed at the White House, where they have, very limited space? They can't allow everybody who wants to be there to be there.
That's a good question. And you did see in the first Trump administration, they took away credentials from Jim Acosta of CNN, which was a famous case, and the courts ruled they had to return them. So I don't know if they'll try something like that again. It failed with the courts last time. I don't know if listeners realize this, but the seating in the press briefing room is actually controlled by the White House Correspondents Association. They determine who sits where, and that's, to try to keep the politics out of it. But.
Yeah, well, enough with Hans's good questions. I want to go back to the cat fight.
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
Let's go back
Absolutely.
to. Let's
All right,
let's
I'm
go-
sorry
yeah,
I
exactly.
changed the
God,
topic.
anyway,
Yeah.
really quickly, there was video of Biden walking in the sand. As one person on Twitter said, Biden faced his toughest challenge yet, the sand. And just back to Jill Biden, man, she is so done, because if my husband was tripping over the sand or having trouble maneuvering in the sand, I probably would have put an arm out and help him. Describe how Jill was sort of like, you're on your own, kiddo.
Yeah, she, I do think she is known to hold a grudge. I'll put it that way. She is the grudge holder in the family. And I think, and you can see her point of view on this, she thinks her husband was treated very unfairly by the party.
Sure.
And you can kind of understand that.
Well,
so,
we have two very loyal wives. We'll put it that way. That's a nice way to end
well,
this.
that is a lovely way to end that.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We've got more coming up. It is 7:43. Well, Hans, the autopsy of the Harris-Walz campaign is ongoing, and we now know that Harris paid Oprah Winfrey $1 million in this failed bid to help the campaign. You recall that Oprah it was like a town hall, very muted beige cover, soft armchairs, and they were having this very real and organic conversation. Well, it turns out Oprah was paid, and of course, some members of the media on the left are saying, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. Well, now the FEC records show there were two separate payments of $500,000 each from the Harris campaign to Oprah's production company in October. So this appears to be true, and there was no. Right. There was no indication that this was a paid endeavor.
Yeah, I suspect they were trying to say, well, she didn't get the money directly, but, come on. It went to her production company. Right. And who owns that production company? Why, Oprah Winfrey.
That's right. That's right. And she actually was sort of, I'm not going to say ambushed, and I was actually surprised. TMZ found her walking on the street by herself, I suppose, in her neighborhood, and asked, this is Oprah. And I was just surprised she wasn't I just assume she has a bodyguard with her, but she didn't, and TMZ approached her. Let's play cut 11.
Hey, Oprah, good morning. How are you, darling? You looking very good. How do you think the election went?
Not talking about the election, thank you very much.
Oh, is it true that they paid you $1 million for the endorsement for Kamala?
Not true.
Not true, okay.
I was paid nothing, ever.
What do you think about all the celebrities with their mass exodus?
I'm not talking about it.
Do you think Prince Harry's going to lose his visa now that Trump's president? Thank you, Oprah.
And then she got in her big vehicle, driving herself. I was, again, kind of surprised by that. But anyway, so she's denying it. But again, I think this is completely grossly unfair that this was presented as Oprah just doing an interview as a journalist when her production company was, and that's, again, sort of a minor detail. Her production company was paid $1 million. And this is on top of all the other waste that we've seen. Influencers, Kamala Harris paying influencers, Kamala Harris, building a set for Call Your Daddy podcast. I mean, this is the kind of
$100,000. I told that to my wife after I read it, and she was going, "Gee, I could have done it for a couple $100."
Well, actually, it's funny. Larry, he and two of his friends, they built a set in his basement, and he tweeted out, I didn't spend $100,000, and it looks better than the Call Your Daddy set, which really looked like IKEA sort of furniture, cheap IKEA furniture. So this is interesting, but again, I think it was pretty gross and dishonest of the Harris administration or Harris campaign not to disclose that they spent all of this money, again, on influencers who, again, don't disclose that they've been paid to say these things. And yesterday we had that story of an influencer who said she was offered $50,000 to say on screen that she is switching her vote to Kamala from Trump. I mean, they were throwing money left and right.
Yeah, I think most ordinary folks, all the people who elected Donald Trump would call that a attempted bribe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. There is more coming up. It is 7:52 on O'Connor.